Ian Wells had books full of poems he'd written, hidden away in the drawers. But one spoken word night changed his artistic expression forever. Please welcome Ian Wells to the stage.
My mate Caro sent me a link to this performance poetry gig, and it got me thinking about my writing. Now, lighting darkness with 415 volts of three-phrase power. But I'm no electrician, I'm a physician. A doctor of letters without the PhD, just striving to diarise life concisely, driving lyrical highways, trying to find the right way to write the rhyme. But all this time I spend with a pen in my hand, for what? Sure, I write for me and what I see and believe and a release for my feelings, but how can I be free if my words live in captivity in my own books? So I took a look around these books, and what I found, maybe not profound, but sound enough to lead my hometown to be here tonight. Because I can write. And I am right when I say that a word never heard, read or spoken is a broken promise. An unopened seed under the tree of life, never watered, will never bear fruit, like the twisted, distorted limbs and roots of a bonsai. Just a miniature version of what could have been. But unseen or unheard, I'll never know if my words flow into an ocean of understanding, where waves greet me, and discreetly strangers agree completely that I speak for greater than me when I write from my heart. So it's time to start sharing, because waiting for a viral post is like waiting on Fisher's ghost to point to the paddock where I'm buried. And it's scary, you know? Am I digging my own grave? Will failure enslave me? And what is success? Because I don't crave fame. Crazy game I don't want to play where your life's worth based on number of followers, but on my blog I can remain anonymous. But I would like some recognition for my position as a wordsmith. So my blog was the first step, and tonight, one giant leap for mankind. Nah, just for me. But unlike the moon, I shine my own light, bright enough to see life is finite, and I'm trying to right the apathetic wrong of my life with this question. Do you hear me? So that was the first poem I ever performed live. It was the first poem I'd ever read to a public audience. Oh, thank you very much. It was about the 5,000th poem I'd ever written. I'd written since I was 10. That was, I was 43, 44 at the time. And I've written poetry my entire life, but I never shared it with anyone. Never shared it. I had heaps of punk rock poems and things as an angsty teen. But I knew as a teen that writing poetry was not cool. You know, writing song lyrics is cool. You know, if you're at the front of a band and you're writing lyrics, that's cool. And they're very similar things, but writing poetry wasn't cool. So I didn't share it with anyone. And I wrote my whole life. Spent about 10 years overseas, travelling, backpacking, single mostly, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Worked winters to travel summers. And you remember the summers, like you remember that bloke you met, that girl you met, that day at the beach. You remember all that because that was fun. You remember the nightclubs, you remember all that. What you don't remember is when summer's over and you're going, like, you've got no mates in Europe, anyone in Europe, nah, where am I going to go? Oh, go to Germany. So you go to Germany and you get a job and you find a place to stay and you've got no friends. You don't remember those things because they're hard, but I wrote about them. So I have all these books of those in-between times, in between the amazing summers where life couldn't be any better. And it's like, wow, I'm broke again. What am I going to do? But I've got so many things about that. So I used to write a lot. My pen is my connection to my world. It connects me to my words, it connects me to my world, and it connects me to this moment in time, this present. I write about the past, and sometimes I can't move forward from something until I write it into the past. If there's some perceived wrong or something I've said or something I've done or something that wasn't quite right, a girl I kissed, a girl I shouldn't have kissed, whatever that is, if I write it, then I can leave it in the past and walk away. But also, I write about the future. I write about things that I'd like to see, that I'd like to see things in my future. Manifestation, if you like, whatever. But I'm completely present in that moment. And so, I was in London and I'd met this So I actually wrote this about a girl. I met her in Turkey, saw her at a party that summer. Wasn't a girlfriend, wasn't anyone special. And then she walked across the dance floor and I'm like, wow, look at that moment. And so I went home that night and I captured this moment. But I blew it out of all proportion. Like I made this thing the most fantastic thing you could ever imagine. And then I'm going to make a point not to look at my lovely wife now because she'll bring me to tears. But 10 years later, I'm sitting in a restaurant with a mate and it's his wife's birthday, and my now wife walks in. I'm like, wow, that's that moment I wrote about. That exact image is the moment I wrote about 10 years ago. And so, I don't know if I'd manifested this thing, but this is the poem. Hopelessly sleepless, irrationally overcome, with fantastic scenarios or delusions of love. With a vision of beauty divinely sublime, akin with legends of times passed by, like a statue of a goddess as she flowed past and time stopped. With my heart. For a beat or a moment, my life went cyclonic. We met in the eye, it was blissful, euphoric, before the tempest resumed and time realigned, and I knew that one moment would last my entire life. So I wrote that about someone completely different, blew it out of all proportion, and manifested my beautiful wife over there. Thanks very much. And so I read that to a mate in London, Scotty, and he's a songwriter, singer-songwriter, and he said, man, I've got heaps of music, but I can't write lyrics to save myself. He said, you should share that, that's amazing. I'm like, nah, mate, it's not what I do. It's not what I do, mate. I just sit like this in my little world and write for myself. And then he said, well, I've got this open mic thing, and I need a song. I'm going to play Berlin Chair by UMI. I'm going to cover that, and then I need a new song. I've got the music, but I don't have the lyrics. He said, let's write a song. So we had about 15 minutes before we had to go to the Sun or the Star, whatever it is, at Clapham Old Town in London. And he said, I need this song. So I said, righto. So we started playing this song, and I'm like, yeah, I'll just riff on reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's like, that's easy. I can write something, just a simple play on words. And so we wrote this song. Everyone loved it. Everyone absolutely loved it. Hopefully I can remember it. You say you can't read me. You say you can't write me. You say you can't add me up. And that's all right with me because I don't want to be an open book everybody's read and then thrown away. I don't want you to see what I don't want to be. So I take these unwanted gifts and I wrap them up. I say that I'm unread. I say it's not written. You can't subtract from me. And that's all right because I don't want to be like arithmetic or some formula for you to work me out. I don't want you to see what I don't want to be. I take these unwanted gifts and I wrap them up. You say I'm amazed, and I say I'm amazed by your persistent attempts to unlock my mind. If I tell you I'm empty behind this facade, will you believe me and leave me tonight? And so he played that, and everyone loved it, and he's going, he wrote it, man, he wrote it. And there's people coming up to me going, wow, that was amazing, that totally captures that moment when you meet someone and you don't know whether to give them all your heart because you could get burnt. And I'm thinking, man, it's just a play on words, eh? But that's the thing, you write something and you release it and people interpret it however they want. It's like a song. You can listen to a song and it means something totally different to you to how your mate listens to it. And then Scotty said, you've got to keep writing, you've got to keep writing, you've got to start performing. I'm like, yeah, man, it's not what I do. And so I came home after years away and had a hiking business. And I've always written about what I'm experiencing in my life. You know, it's all I can do. Like, it's my life, it's my story, it's all I can do. I'd like to be more creative, but I'm not. You know, like it's what I see and how I translate that into my world, which is words on paper. That's how I interpret the world. And so I spent a lot of time in nature, hiking. And so as one day I was on the Great North Walk, which actually runs just west of here, sort of passes through Somersby and Yarramalong, between Sydney and Newcastle. This section's sort of at Cowan, Brooklyn. And we're sitting one morning at this lookout facing west. And it's like this horseshoe-shaped valley with a ridge all around it, horseshoe-shaped ridge around this valley. And it was just before the sun came up, and this whole valley was filled with cloud. It was like this big doona of cloud across this whole valley. And it was just pulsing. And every now and then, the cloud would sort of overflow the rim and it would roll out and ripple out like water. And we sat and watched this for half an hour. It was amazing. Just watching this breathe and then just ripples of cloud like water. It was just phenomenal. So as I was looking, I was going, right, how do I write this? How do I actually, how do I translate this into something that I remember? Because I remember it, but if I write it down, I remember it better. I remember it in a very different way. And so this is one stanza from that poem, trying to capture this emotion. And how does this one start? Oh, yeah. Okay. So the warming sun evaporates the bed, and night's last breaths are clearly seen. And our world wakes as we breakfast at the lookout by our campsite. And in the silence, we hear the sandstone breathe. I know sandstone doesn't breathe. But when I was in Nepal, doing the Annapurna circuit, sitting at the base of this, just before we crossed the path, we're at 5,500 metres, about 2 weeks into this month-long trek, and Dhaulagiri's there. Dhaulagiri's an 8,000 metre mountain. There's only 14 8,000 metre mountains in the world. If you're ever lucky enough to see one, they are massive pieces of rock. They're amazing. And so I walked out to go to the toilet one night, and there's this 8,000 metre mountain, snow-covered, full moon, pulsing in the moonlight. Just pulsing in the moonlight. This thing was breathing. This 8,000 metre mountain was breathing. And it always stuck with me. I went in, wrote it down, and it always stuck with me. So when I saw the breathing, the cloud breathing, I thought, oh, right, the sandstone breathing, it's like that. And so I related it back to that. And so after I saw back on the hike back there, and the sandstone breathing, I wrote that down. And then throughout the day, every time we'd stop, I'd write little things, and I'd be walking along, a lot of time in the bush, and okay, I can do this and this and this. So when we got to camp that night, put all the kids in bed. I was looking after the school kids, so they all got to bed. I thought, right, so I was sitting around the fire trying to finish this poem, and I always used to write in my tent. And so I finished that poem in my tent. And then the next day, we're sitting around a campfire, and I thought, hey guys, remember that thing we saw? Like, I wrote a poem about it. Who wants to hear it? And the kids were like, not really, man. Poetry, jeez, really? But my mate Caro was there. Now, my mate Caro is the very first line of that first poem I started with. She's gone, yeah, I want to hear it. And so I read it to her, and she's like, man, you've got to do something with your poetry. Like, you've got to do something with it. I'm like, yeah, it's not what I do, mate. It's not what I do. And so then, I know, it was 6 months later, and there was a poetry slam at Katoomba. And she was at Katoomba. We were at Bathurst at the time. And so she said, you've got to come up to this poetry slam in Katoomba. So I did, and that was the piece that I performed. And poetry slam's interesting because it's a competition. You've got a time limit, and it's a competition, and it's judged by your peers. And you know what? I loved it. I loved the performance side. I was a bit long, so I got marked down for it's a 2-minute limit, and it was about 2 minutes and a few seconds. And so I got marked down, and those points they deducted cost me the win in the Katoomba thing, and I would have gone to state titles. I'm over it. I'm massively over it. Not an issue at all. Not an issue. And so that was the first time, and I've been to heaps since, and I never get to state, There may be some state winners in this audience now, or some state attendees in the audience now. But it's fun, it's fun to perform poetry. It's really fun. And I'm the middle class, middle-aged, hetero, cisgendered white guy. Like, no one cares, What have I got to say when you've got Indigenous guys who literally can't walk down the street without being bashed, abused, or arrested, Like, they have to tell their stories because they're really important stories, until it becomes not an issue and it doesn't happen and we can stop telling those stories. But I felt like a fraud, Like, I thought, who's going to care about my story? You know what? The poets cared. The poets really cared. Like, as long as you're up there sharing your story, they just think that's great, So there's a really cool poetry community on the Central Coast, and that whole slam community, it's fun. It's really cool. They encourage everyone to share their stories. So, no, I don't win them, but you have fun doing it. I have fun sharing my story. And so I write a lot about connection. I write a lot about, I can point out my wife and kids now because I'm not going to cry. I write a lot about my wife and kids, but I don't remember them that much because all the ones from a kid and as a teen, I used to read them all the time. When I travelled, I had like the happy side of the book and the sad side of the book. And the sad side's like that thick and the happy side's this, because when I was happy, I was out having too much fun to be at home writing. But it was really interesting. I'd come home and I'd read them and I'd read them, I'd read them. All my teen angst ones, I'd come home from a night out and just read them for hours and then comment on them and critique them and change them and then write something. I'd be up for hours doing it. When I worked in Sydney, I'd be on the train in the morning, the train in the afternoon. I just wrote and wrote and wrote. So I had all these things. And so I wrote about whatever I've been doing at the time. And I write a lot about my wife and kids, but now I write them and I digitise them, so I don't read back at them. So what's been really interesting over this process is to go back and pull out some of those, Like in 2020, I wrote a 20-word poem every day. It was my 2020 vision, 20 words every day throughout 2020. And it was a massive year for us, We had 3 kids and we were in Bathurst, moved that year. Obviously, it was lockdown. And our lockdown thing, we'd go out the back and so we had backed onto the football fields, the soccer fields at Bathurst, and there were autumnal leaves falling off. And so what we'd do during lockdown, we'd go catch leaves. Like we'd walk around the oval in our big gumboots because it was soaked and cold, and all the autumnal leaves would be floating off, and we'd be diving there, taking speckies, catching leaves, or running across 3 fields trying to catch a leaf. It was so much fun. And so I've gone back and I've rediscovered all those things as a part of this journey, which is really cool. But I'll finish with the last thing I wrote as a performance piece, because it was at the entrance over Easter weekend, and it was a walking story tour. And so there's all these people telling stories about their entrance experience, and there was a couple of poets on it, and there was a couple of actors on it. It was fantastic. It was so much fun. So this is the last thing I wrote, and today in the early session I cut it short. Who wants to hear the long version? It's only 3 minutes. Well, yeah? All right. Now I've got to remember it. Okay. So I've got the first minute. I did that this morning, but okay. Sorry if I mess this up. I commune with the ocean daily. A whispered language of calm and connection with pops and crackles for emphasis, and I blow bubbles in response. Waves rush to pick me up and carry me when I surf or sup, like my dad used to piggyback me when I was a child. Then I used to laugh because I was flying. Now it's because I'm walking on water. The ocean repeatedly wraps me in watery hugs when I body surf the shore break with my kids, picking me up and dumping me on the sand like I dump them on their beds when play wrestling. Other times when I sit on my wife's granny's memorial seat overlooking the beach at Baddo Bay, I feel known. I feel loved. It's like the ocean is family. Parent, grandparent, sibling, child. The interrelation is uncertain, but the relationship is unequivocal, unbreakable, constant, reassuring, vital, and vibrant. It's like those meditations that you listen to that when you listen to the ocean, guiding you to breathe in with an incoming wave and breathe out as it recedes. Breathe in with an incoming wave and breathe out as it recedes. Until it's almost like I don't breathe without the ocean. At low tide, my heart beats like a rock pool, filling and draining with each surge of the sea. At high tide, saltwater fingers reach far up the beach, trying to tickle my feet as we dance on the sand together. But during storms and after heavy rains, we can't speak. The ocean's fighting to breathe through the plastic weed and fallen trees that choke her. Driven in a dark, furious, foamy frenzy, apologetically gauging swathes of sand from the beach, further choking her. Storm water surging into her mouth. There's nowhere else for it to run because everywhere is drowning, 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 and I watch on helpless as she fights to survive. Swirling, sucking, blowing, churning, rising, falling, crashing, hurling, breaking, fighting to breathe through the plastic, weed and fallen trees that choke her. When the storm finally abates, the ocean is exhausted. Trying to breathe with each tide surge and purge herself of the storm debris that smothers her. Rolling weary waves up the beach like a near-dead swimmer crawling up the sand, spewing foam, collapsing. So I clean the beach of foreign material, blocking her airways and Sit with her, quiet and still, breathing, 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 until her breathing regulates with mine. It's like those meditations I'm sure the ocean listens to, guiding her to flow in as he inhales and flow out as he exhales. Flow in as he inhales and flow out as he exhales. Until it's almost like we don't breathe without each other.